speaker, our wonderful stand-in speaker, many times he has been me, and today I don't know who he was supposed to be, but at any rate, his name is Marc Miller. Most of you know and love him. He has written a book on looking for a job. He is a career coach. He helps people with their own job searches. He's a very, very interesting person and a very intelligent person in a lot of different areas. He has reinvented himself multiple times, changing industries, changing careers, and he finally is doing something that he's not only good at, but he loves. That's what everybody's hoping to find. But he's going to talk to you about the failures and what the failures taught him as he went on his way. Marc Miller.
Again, my name is Marc Miller, and I'm going to see if I can get my slides going here. This presentation was actually designed, I was asked to speak at a career reinvention virtual summit about, I don't know, 3 years ago. And talking about, I'm on my 7th career. I was asked to speak at this reinvention conference, and as I said, I'm on my 7th career. 3 or 4 of those came all while at IBM. But what I'm going to do is take you through a little bit about me. By the way, I was born in New York City. Grew up at Jersey. Exit 9 of the Jersey Turnpike. Went to college at Northwestern. When I graduated in 1978, I joke I went to work for the board, IBM. You know, I have to be careful about using that. If I get the kids' room, they go bored. It's kind of like similar with if you use the term I'm MacGyvering something. The kids don't get that. It's back? Yes. Oh, okay. So I worked there for 22 years. And I joke I wandered around a lot. I started out as a programmer, assembly programmer, working on word processors. I then went into quality assurance. I then ran an IT help desk for 7 years. I was pulling drafting boards away from mechanical engineers and putting on big CAD CAM screens. I then went off into training. I ran a worldwide technical support training group. I then crossed to the dark side and went into sales. Actually, I went into an IBM briefing center. And yes, you're going to go down, let him click that. I then became an IT consultant. This was my first failure. I last less than a year. I then went into marketing, and I left. IBM screwed me on my pension back in '99. I would never forget having the discussion. They converted me to a cash balance plan, and then they converted me back. And I remember having a discussion with an old boss of mine saying, oh, they converted us back, they took it away once, they can't take it away again. I said, oh yes they can, and they will. And they would have. So I left in 2000 to go work for a successful tech startup, Agira. Rather interesting. When I left IBM in 2000, I was 8 years away from retirement. I would have been able to retire at 51, because I started when I was 21. Reality is I wouldn't have made it, because the guy who replaced me in AIX marketing was a better marketer than I was, and he was laid off in 2003, 2004. In fact, he was a launchpad guy. That's how I eventually got to know him. And by the way, IBM stopped funding the pension in 2008, which would have been my 30th year. So I then, Agira, got acquired by Lucent. Anybody remember Lucent? Yeah, they used to be the most widely held stock in the world. By the way, these guys made the old IBM look highly efficient. Bell Labs was the biggest black hole you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it was incredible. By the way, this logo was, you can beat this. It was also called the Reddit asshole. You know, there were all kinds of, they actually paid for that. By the way, Agira, we had a great logo. but I can't find it anymore. And Lucent, when we got acquired, had 192,000 employees. We were spun out, Lucent Microelectronics was spun out as a Gear Systems. 16,000 of us. 18 months later, I left, we were down to 6,000. I was on the team that was ranking people on who got laid off next. And I ended up leaving in 2003, but the big thing was in 2002, on July 11th, this is a picture taken exactly 2 weeks after I came down a hill on my bicycle. This is not a little namby-pamby aluminum tour. This is a big-time, heavy-duty steel touring frame, and you'll notice that the frame's bent in 4 places. I hit a car head-on. Our combined speeds exceeded 50 miles an hour. I tore up a knee, I broke a hip, I dislocated a shoulder, broke a bunch of ribs, had imprints of the pads of the helmet in my head, broke the clavicle, but I had no internal injuries and no brain injuries I'm willing to admit to. I spent 5 days in the Brain Trauma Center. They had me walking in crutches in 3 days. I was back on a bike in 10 weeks, flying back to China in 4 months. Oh, by the way, I flew right smack into the SARS epidemic, bird flu epidemic in Guangdong province. It's like, this also happened 2 weeks after my son graduated from high school. So I was home with him that entire summer while I was rehabbing. And we had those discussions of, you're going to college. You can eat like crap or you can eat healthy. Your first college roommate, not going to be your best buddy. The odds of throwing 2 18-year-old boys in the same room and them getting along is almost, but you have to respect each other's privacy. What I later found out 4 years later when he graduated from the University of Dayton, he listened. He actually turned into a decent human being. So if I hadn't had the bike accident, I wouldn't have had the time with my son. So this actually was a blessing. So I came back and I said, that following year, I said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. Agira had basically left us debt-free. I got about $150K in retention bonuses, which allowed me to pay off the house and finish funding my son's college education. So I was 46, debt-free. I went off and get my teacher certification at ECC. Not a good thing. First year they had their alternative certification, and it does not prepare you. And by the way, I've taught adults for 20 plus years in 40 different countries. And so I went through this program thinking I was going to be a teacher. I'm going to teach high school math. Well, you know what? I suffered from what I refer to in my book as I suffered from MSU. I made stuff up. I said, they're going to want me. There's a shortage of math teachers. I'm an engineer. I've taught these adults all over the world. No, they didn't want us. They didn't want any guy over 40. We don't do what we're told. And I ignored every sign that they didn't want me. I got hired the week before school started in 2004 down at Aikens High School. And I taught for 2 years. I could not do that and stay healthy. In fact, I did an episode in my podcast on how I seduced myself into thinking I could do this. Now, I've been a professional, I've been talking for a living for most of my career, 2/3 of my career. And I seduced myself in believing I was an extrovert. I am not. By the way, when I'm done here today, I'm going to go. I'm an introvert. I don't get energy from doing this. Being on in a classroom for 30 hours a week, I was good at it. It was exhausting. So I did this for 2 years. By the way, I got approached all the time by people that look like people here in the room saying, I want to do what you're doing when I retire. And I said, who are these? They were primarily white, educated, most were suburban raised, knew who their parents were, and they say, well, I'm going to go teach over in Westlake. I'm going to go teach up in Round Rock. I said, no, you're not. You're going to teach in a large urban school district with minority-majority populations, poverty, and single-parent households. Toto, you're not in Kansas anymore. So if you're going to do this, you had better understand why you are doing this. You are not going to go back into a high school that looked like the one you grew up in suburbia in, because they ain't going to hire you. They want kids fresh out of college. So this was my second failure. I did not last. I came out of that. That's when I joined Launchpad. 2006, I've been on the board since late 2006. And the whole idea here was, I met Kathy. We've been together ever since. But Launchpad, you know, what I saw was most of the people who I worked with back at IBM, and I had all my friends at Dell, they were all getting spit out. And, you know, financially I was fine. I'd go back to work. But they were in real doo-doo. Technical talk there. So what did I do? I said, I want to go off and do nonprofit work. And this is my third failure, because one of the things I did was I said, you know what, I can do this. I wanted to get into a nonprofit so I could do fundraising. I'd done sales, right? And by the way, fundraisers will tell you sales is not fundraising. That's BS. Well, by the way, being a non-Jew, being the face of a Jewish organization is interesting. I grew up in an entirely Jewish neighborhood. My high school was 3/4 Jewish. We used to get Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur off as school holidays, so it was kind of like going home. I lasted 1 year, and that's when I relapsed. I went back into the startup. And I'm not going to talk about this, but this, for me, this was a huge mistake. Now, I rode out the Great Recession at a tech startup. I got paid decent, but this tore me up. When I left in 2011, beginning of 2011, basically, my boss, and I've written about this, I just republished a post on this. My ethical boundaries were crossed. I was told to hire the CEO's brother, who wasn't qualified to be a trainer. He'd never taught adults, never done anything internationally. We were doing it in 172 countries. And this was right smack in the middle of the Great Recession. This is when our Friday meetings had 400 people in them. And I was told to go hire this relative from North Carolina. To say the least, I gave him my single finger salute, and I timed my departure exactly to the day in which I got within 14 days of my next options. I got my fourth quarter bonus. I went, except I used different figures. That's when I launched Career Pivot. And I left in 2011. I actually launched the first website in June of 2011. The brand got launched in 2012. And I've been doing this ever since. And this next year, I'll be taking this to Mexico. We are moving to Mexico. We're moving to Mexico. Why? Because I spent $25,000 this year on health insurance and health care and didn't reach my deductible. And it's going to get worse next year. So, my first mistake was I was seduced. My former manager seduced me. Has anybody been seduced into a job? Oh, it's going to be wonderful. We're going to love you. It's going to be this. And you get there and it's not what you think it is. Well, I was lured in consulting. I was working at IBM. I'd been in an IBM briefing center for about 7 years. I was bored silly. My boss, Teresa, who was the best boss I ever worked for, she left. She went over to IBM Global Services. And she said, come on over. So I did. So, as I said, I got over to IBM Global Services, and I was offered one project. Easy Corp. Anybody familiar with Easy Corp? pawn shops, short-term loans. My job had absolutely nothing to do with loaning money. Although, when I would talk to the business analysts and they say, well, how many transactions a day? And they would go, they give me estimates, and I said, fine. Give me all the data from the 19 San Antonio stores for 3 years, and I dumped it down into a database. And what I found disgusted me. Give you an idea, short-term loans average 81% of the loans pay out. These loans were 20% a month, not a year, a month. Very complicated business rules because they're regulated all the way down to the county level. Oh, by the way, something like 70% of all stolen goods that come into pawn shops are brought in by family members. In other words, dad goes out of town, son grabs his dad's table saw, takes it in, he pawns it. Dad's come home, where's my table saw? Must have gotten stolen. When the police watch the pawn shop real carefully, when they find it, they know exactly who pawned it. Because you had to run your driver's license through. I mean, well, I got in there and I said, after about 6 months, I can't do this. So the issues, number one, I work with unhappy married people, unhappy divorced people, and unhappy single people. In other words, when I was at the briefing center, we had a great team. Teresa was wonderful at hiring superstars and leaving us alone. Here, I had a constant flurry of consultants that would come rotate in and out. It was miserable. I hated it. 2, my values. One of the things I am I do this with my clients. One of the things is there are some of us who are very mission driven. I am a very mission driven individual. I can't work for anybody. I have to believe in what I'm doing. They're not all like that. Well, my values were totally crossed. Give you an example. I found in the 19 San Antonio stores, I found tens of thousands of $10 loans. I went to the business analyst and said, who borrows $10? Oh, I remember Bucky looked at me and says, oh, gas money. Working poor, needs to go to work, he needs enough money for gas, he takes his wedding ring off, he pawns it for $10, he comes back in 2 weeks later, pays $12, gets his ring back. Now, in every store, there was at least one loan that had rolled over for 2 and 3 years. And remember, pawn loans are limited to $500 that generate between $2,000 and $5,000 in interest. I mean, it's just scummy. I finally quit when my young project manager tried to publicly humiliate me in front of my team. By the way, this is one of those things. My first job at IBM was writing software where I was supposed to sit in a cube all day writing on a coding pad. It was horrible. What was I doing here? I was sitting in a cube all day writing technical specifications. And by the way, my first technical proposals, technically they were great. Writing-wise, they sucked. Well, I got lambasted for it. I said, go find me a technical writer. I've written articles before for major publications, but I always had a tech writer who worked and massaged them. I quit. Now, what I did was I resigned from the project, and the whole point here is I'm going to tell you I failed fast. I did not wait. Because one of the challenges, and this is one of the things we see in our generation, failure is not an option. When we were growing up, if you failed, you were a screw up. Now we live in the world of fail often, fail fast. So one of the things I've seen out of the Great Recession, I can give you 2 examples. One, I've met a woman who decided she started a business in 2007, late 2007. A horrible time to start a business. She held on to it till 2012. end up folding it down, $40,000 in debt, and been out of her previous career long enough she couldn't get back in. Versus, you remember Jody Garrison?
Yes.
Jody's a recruiter for AMD. Jody bought a staffing franchise at the end of 2007. A horrible time to buy a staffing franchise. She folded it down in 2008. She didn't lose a lot of money, and she said, this is never, it's not going to make enough money, and she needed to go back and get a job. So she didn't wait, but so the first thing was I failed fast. Two, I had a plan B. I was able to go back into marketing at IBM, and that was just a holding spot. But I had some place to go back to. And what I'm always going to tell you is you always have to have a plan B. I'm also going to tell you no matter when you get your next job, you need to have a plan B. And I learned a ton from this. Number one, I run my business today based on how IBM Global Services ran their projects. I learned I have to surround myself with people who I like. I'm a solopreneur. I have no employees, but I got a virtual assistant up in Virginia. I've got an intern who helps me with and now she just helps me with my podcasts. I have Brian Kinsella, who's now working with me, one of our board members. And I've got Kay McManus, who does my books. I have all these people around me who support me. I learned from this. This is real important to me. So my next one. I thought I went for my dream job. I tell you one thing, dream jobs don't exist. I can't tell you, well, my dream jobs don't exist. One of the key things, I went off to teach high school math. Yes, I suffered from MSU, big time. Like I told you, I thought that I was going to, I had the bike accident, I wanted to do something philanthropic, I wanted to do something for the good. So I went from making 6 figures down to making $39,000 a year. And by the way, I ended up in my first year teaching, mentoring my principal. I had a very experienced principal. And at IBM, I twice re-engineered organizations. And we were the first school to get a Gates grant for high school redesign. And it took me almost 6 months to finally get her to understand. By the way, I learned a long time ago, I can't make anybody do anything. So she said, well, we're just going to go and tell the teachers what to do, and they're just going to go do it. I said, no, they're not. By the way, I'd been there about 2 months, and I realized, all these teachers, they're exactly like my wife. My wife's a former nurse. Nurses and teachers have exactly very similar personality types. They're kind, caring, giving people who don't know how to say no, don't know how to negotiate, and don't take care of themselves. It's all for the kids. Oh, by the way, they're incredibly passive-aggressive and risk-averse. They'll say, yeah, I'll go do that. And then they go back in the classroom and do anything they damn well please. So I got my first year. I made it through my first year. And it was tough. I taught 3 sections of Algebra 1 and 2 sections of Algebra 2. By the way, I blew the doors off getting my juniors and seniors to pass the exit tax test. I blew the doors off. School average was under 30%. I had over 95%. No one noticed. No one. I got interviewed 2 years later by a University of Texas professor saying, what did you do? You were a first year school. I said, I trained engineers in China. If I can do that, I can do anything. I taught my kids calculator skills. I worked on their muscle memory in their fingers. They could clear a calculator without even looking at it. And he says, well, that's not preparing them to go on to higher level math. I said, they're not going on to higher level math. 95% of my kids couldn't add 8 plus 3 in their head. I can't fix that. but I can't get them to graduate from high school. I've got more funny stories from those years. I mean, one day, two of my senior boys looked at me, both Hispanic, very poor. One came from a really screwed up family. And they looked at me and said, "Hey, Mr. Miller, how long have you been married?" I said, 25 years. And they looked at me and said, "Has it always been interesting?" Wow. Interesting is an interesting word. Yes, I can say it's always been interesting. Next class I had Yasmin, who was 18, married and pregnant. Actually, a good kid. One day I asked her, I said, "So how's married life?" And she says, "Not as bad as I thought." I said, "Okay, you gotta give me more than that." She says, "Well, my husband's not very mature." I said, "Well, how old is he?" 17. I said, "Male 17 and maturity. Those are oxymorons. The male brain doesn't finish developing until 25. And most women will tell you it's much older than that." So what I did was, my second year, we had 60 pregnancies out of 2,000 students. Okay? So I told all my girls, guys were scum, and they would go, "Oh boy, he's wonderful, he loves me." I said, "No, he's not." "Well, how do you know?" I said, "He's scum." "Well, how do you know?" "He's 17, 18 years old. He's male. He's scum." And then I told all my guys that women are evil. They're going to screw with your brain. And then maybe I could, hopefully another one I had Grace, who was, the end of my first year, she was a junior, she got pregnant, parents kicked her out of the house, she ended up moving in with her sister and her husband. Grace's baby ended up with hydrocephalus and spina bifida. Really horrible. My wife and I went down and visited with her in the Dell Children's Hospital in the intensive care unit. And she's down there all by herself. She's 17 years old trying to deal with that. So when you go into teaching, you have to understand why you're there. And by the way, it's not to teach math. It's to teach life skills. Because you're not going to go up to Westwood or Westlake and teach advanced math. You're going to teach these kids, and these kids have problems that, I'm sorry, as a white middle-class guy, I adapted to. I like to say, I learned, I've been taught in 40 different countries. I was dealing with another culture, and it's culture of poverty. So I had expectations going in that were totally misaligned. One of my other famous make stuff up, I assumed I was going to go take the school district's health insurance, right? I'd always gotten health insurance from my employer, no problem. I was going to go there, and I signed up for the paperwork, and my out-of-pocket payment was double my COBRA payment. I was making, before taxes, $3,000 a month, and my health insurance was going to be $1,000 a month for my son, me, and my wife. So I stayed on COBRA, and we kind of figured it out. I said, this is my dream job. I did not do my homework. Now, I talked to some teachers, and the teachers told me what I wanted to hear. I was very fortunate my first year. I had a Algebra 1 mentor who, when I ran into problems, she cut me no slack. Now, she was a very, very experienced teacher with the demographic I was dealing, which was probably 80% of my kids came from Dove Springs Public Housing, mostly Hispanic, with, again, problems that I learned a whole lot. This was not my dream job, but what got me was my emotional investment. I was able to do this, but it tore me up emotionally. I said, my second year, I had a second period class that, I'll never forget one kid coming in. Jesus came in, missed the class, and said, "Hey, Miss Mill, what did we do yesterday?" I said, "So where were you, Jesus?" "I had to go get piss tested." "Drug tested?" "Why'd you have to go get piss tested?" "Because my PO, probation officer, requires it." I went, "You got a PO?" I finally, one day in my second period class, 28 kids, how many of you guys got POs? Every hand but one went up. Oh. And I was very fortunate. My neighbor, Betty, our sons grew up together. Betty was a juvenile public defender. She couldn't tell me which of my kids, but she says, I defend a lot of your kids. And by the way, they say you're fun. And so thinking this was my dream job, So the results, I resigned in my second year. I was depressed, I was worn out, I was exhausted. And I should have taken a year off. I was that worn out. And I didn't. The other thing is I waited too long. Yes, failure is not an option. Well, I literally exhausted myself. So it took me 10 months to land the job at the J. And I had some contract jobs in there. And this was probably my most miserable 10 months of my life. And it's all because I should have quit at the end of my first year. But failure is not an option. So, lessons learned, I gotta fail. I can't wait. If I see this is not gonna work, you just gotta say, okay, throw it away. Now, did I do a lot of really good stuff in those 2 years? The answer is heck yes. Do I feel good about what I did? Yep. I joke, I mentored my principal. One of the things I explained to her, whenever you make organizational change, there are three groups. There are the naysayers, the fence-sitters, and your advocates. By the way, the naysayers go away. Don't worry about that. The fence-sitters, who's going to convince the fence-sitters? The advocates. It's not you. Well, principals are they are trained to be generals. Well, I say what you need to do is muffle this voice, amplify this voice, and shut up. Principals shutting up? By the way, the principal they put in charge of high school redesign for the whole district was the biggest general you ever found. And I'm going, this is the worst person to implement change. And that's who they put in. And of course, as usual, it failed. So, my last one was, okay, I wanted to go into nonprofit. I looked for nonprofits where the mission resonated with me. I got nowhere. Now, by the way, Austin has so many nonprofits that don't pay anything, and Launchpad Job Club is one of those. We're hopefully going to start. We're raising money, and by the way, when you go get a job, you're going to come back and give us money. Kathy always hates me when I do that.
I do.
She doesn't, but she does. Okay. And I just finally, after I looked and looked and looked, I finally went, okay, I'll take anything. I went to the Green Lights, which is now Mission Capital Conference. I did all the right stuff. I found the 5 nonprofits I wanted to get. I got FaceTime with all the executive directors. And I got FaceTime with the JCAA, Jewish Community Association of Austin. Yes, I was a member of the J. I worked out there. I lived across the other side of the Mopac. I lived over in Allendale. So they were looking for someone to build a corporate development program. They hired me. I said, you know what, I can make this work. Well, I can't work for a nonprofit that doesn't align with my interests. Other piece was I had to manage expectations. By the way, most Jewish organizations around the country, when they raise money from corporations, they raise 95% of it from small businesses that are owned by Jewish business owners. i.e., it's coming from the business owner. Other than Michael Dell, we don't even have a Jewish-owned car dealer here. We have almost no Jewish-owned businesses here. But they were expecting me that companies were just going to come. Here's money. Jim Sudd was on the board, and he was the CFO at Whole Foods. Oh, we'll get money out of Whole Foods. I said, no, you're not. You're going to get a dime out of them. Whole Foods traditionally has not given any cash donations to the local community. They give tons of product. Tons of product. I used to run a lot of bicycle events. I could get as many bananas, oranges, and bars as I wanted. Well, they were expecting me to raise $100,000, and I got in there. I said, it ain't going to work. The more I understood, and by the way, this was 2007? Okay, I met with every bank president in town, and every bank president said, geez, thank you for coming. Please leave. And and it's interesting, for our fall gala, I ended up getting $15,000 out of Bank of America. And Mark Winkleman, who we honored, who at that time owned Calendar Club, he owns it again, he couldn't get a dime out of Wells Fargo. And he squeezed every one of his suppliers. And it's like, okay, I can't do this. So I made the decision, and the organizational challenges I won't go into. And again, I saw a lot of bad behavior. I saw a lot of bad behavior. So I made the decision at 6 months, I'm out of here. Now, I didn't resign until the end of the year, until I'd been there 1 year. What I did was I decided that at 6 months, I said, I will leave after the fall gala. So I'll ride it out, but I'm out of here. But by the way, this also allowed me to start networking for my next gig. So I said I timed it after a major fundraising, and I landed. It's interesting. I left at the end of October, thinking I'm going to take 2 months off. I'm not going to do squat until after Christmas. I had 3 opportunities land on my doorstep almost immediately, and I was hired the middle of December at Life Size. And part of it was I made the decision early to get the heck out. In other words, I failed fast. And I understood, you know what? I learned this from my teaching experience. I can't do this. So, as I said, we grew up in the era of failing is absolutely horrible. It's not. The whole point here is, as I said, we grew up in this era, right? And part of it, yes, I joke, I'm 61 years old. I was raised to be an employee, to go work for a father-like company. That would take care of me. And after 30 or 40 years, I would ride off into the sunset with my pension and retire. Yes, and my gold watch, right? And 3/4 of the way through, they moved my cheese. Right? Does this resonate? Right? This is not how it's supposed to be. So I went to work for a father-like company. I went to work for IBM. So this is probably the hardest thing to understand. If you are going to fail, fail fast. In other words, walk in and understand, how am I going to measure this to see whether it's going to work? And you may not leave, but if you determine, wow, this really sucks, then I said, if you ever look at my Berkman assessment, I did a lot of nasty stuff to myself at IBM. By the way, one of my mantras is, when we go to work, we become actors. We play roles. Why? Because we're paid to play those roles. And if you do it long enough, you start thinking you are that role. I got a bunch of those where I changed my behavior, and then I started to believe I was that person. Like, I am very introverted. I can sit in my office. I spent all day yesterday, believe it or not, recording a video by myself on my iPad, writing a script. I didn't see a soul yesterday. That was fun. So this is probably one of the hardest things to learn, is when you start going up in a new direction, be comfortable in just saying, okay, this ain't gonna work. 2 is have a plan B. What are you gonna do when it doesn't work out? Like I talked about the one woman who held on and held on and held on. We've talked from time to time, and she's screwed financially. Single woman in her 50s, no backup plan. She's $40,000, $50,000 in debt, and struggling to get back in her old industry because she waited too long. Okay? So, is start out at the beginning, what am I going to do if this doesn't work? Now, one of the things I did when I started Career Pivot was I started doing training webinars for a major international construction company. They were PBS&J. I don't know, they became Atkins and they've been bought again. So, but that kept my fingers in the pie. It kept my my learning and development street cred alive, because that's what I'd done in my previous life. When I was at Life Size, I developed online training, both classroom and online training. So, and the last is, if you don't learn from every single screw up, you have lost a major opportunity. Now, as I said, from every one of my failures, I have learned something. I've learned either something about myself, how I would have done it differently. I can tell you from my teaching, although it was incredibly rewarding, it was a horrible decision to go into it. I didn't do my homework. I made stuff up. So, if you don't be able to take the time and reflect back, and usually the last time I did this when we were, I think we were over, when I gave this before, we were over in Michael's place, over in Las Posada. I had multiple people going, yeah, I'd done this a couple of times and I waited too long. So, I'm going to give you some resources. Number one, go to Career Pivot. I'm going to encourage you. How many of you guys listen to podcasts? Okay, you all need to start listening to podcasts. They are free. They are one of the greatest ways to educate yourself. And don't tell me that there's not a podcast that can help you. There's a Chameleon Breeders podcast. There are literally hundreds of thousands. I have my Repurpose Your Career podcast, if you just go to careerpivot.com/podcast. This last Monday, I had Gary O'Neill on. It is one of the best interviews I have ever done. Now, it came from when Gary was out here, his videos on the YouTube site. It is how he would go about finding a job. And it's completely different. And by the way, Gary and I are going to meet in January and start working on a book.
Oh, well, that is. Tell everybody who Gary O'Neill is.
Gary O'Neill.
Not everybody knows.
Gary O'Neill recruits for Austin HR. He's a very, very. Gary O'Neill is a very well-established recruiter here in town. And what I love about Gary, he works for Austin HR. He recruits for about 150 different startups in town. What I love about Gary is, number one, he's direct. He does not, but he understands that, number one, the hiring process that people use today is broken. So he basically says I'm gonna completely avoid any of this applicant tracking system. Who hires people? Hiring managers. And He talks about getting, targeting 600 companies or 200 companies. I talked about targeting 30 or 40. Our methods very closely align. Is I need to get in front of people. Screw job applications. He basically said, he says, if by the time it hits a job board, it's too late. So that's what you're waiting on?